Welcome back to our live and rolling coverage of the SCO and in fact bilateral that's just taken place between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi of China as tensions are rising between India and the United States amid a backdrop of escalating trade disputes. Now, a report in the New York Times has claimed that US President Donald Trump has dropped plans to visit India for the upcoming Quad Summit in November. The report cites sources close to Trump's schedule. While the White House has yet not issued an official statement, the move is being closely watched by global observers. The Quad Summit, set to take place in New Delhi, will bring together leaders from India, Australia, Japan and the United States to discuss pressing geopolitical challenges. But with Trump's absence, the dynamics may shift dramatically. Let's take that point forward with Sushant and Ross, who continue to stay with us. Sushant, I think when Prime Minister was embarking on that visit to Japan, there were already talks about the relevance of Quad as a grouping and what Donald Trump has been doing. Is that going to dilute that relevance? But perhaps Japan tried its best to send out that reminder to the United States in that joint declaration that was released on security, where they said that India will be playing host. So right now, as we all know, these are still in the realm of speculation and reports. But what are your thoughts if the Quad Summit is not attended by the US President? And where is Quad as a grouping standing as of now?
Look, as of now, I don't think Quad is standing anywhere. I think the Americans have undermined it, or at least the Trump administration has undermined it to a point where I think everybody is looking askance at what this grouping is going to be worth to anybody anymore. That is one. The other is if the Americans are not going to come, and that speculation has preceded, in fact, this New York Times report. There has been a lot of talk about whether, Trump's itinerary will allow him to come in September or October for the Quad meeting. So it'll probably go back into the deep freeze until there is another administration in the US which wants to pick up the pieces and try and revive it. But by then, who knows, it might be too late. The speed at which events are moving in the world and how balances of powers are shifting, how alliances are breaking down, how alliances and partnerships are being strained by some rather obnoxious language coming out of Washington.
True.
Dissing people, humiliating their allies, their partners. I don't know what purpose is served by this. Look, if you are a mafia don or you are some kind of, contractor trying to do a business deal and you are speaking in this kind of language, maybe, yeah, it works. But this doesn't work in diplomacy. It doesn't work when two countries and peoples are dealing with each other.
No, I agree that it's not befitting of the US President.
We are seeing in Washington right now. And even if somebody wants to negotiate, they get their backs up, they get their hackles up, and they say, okay, fine, bring it on. That is one. The other thing, and Akansha, allow me a minute.
Sure.
In the last thing, and I think he's right up to a point that, there are going to be a lot of issues between India and China. And clearly he's identified many of them. The fact of the matter is that whenever two countries will engage, and they will try and take the relationship forward, new issues are going to crop up. Old issues are going to revive and new issues are going to crop up. So let's talk about Pakistan, for example. We tried to improve and engage with the Americans at a time when Pakistan was called the most allied ally of the United States. Did that prevent us from talking to the Americans? The Americans are supplying weapons to Pakistan. They were the preferred suppliers. They used to aid Pakistan and turn the other way when Pakistan was indulging in the most horrendous kinds of terrorism. The Americans never interfered, whether it was in Punjab when they were massacring people left, right and center, the Pakistanis and the Khalistani terrorists were incidentally being given refuge in the United States. We've engaged with the Americans, haven't we? There are many different come between countries. You just have to try and tackle them, find middle grounds, which is what diplomacy is all about. So that doesn't really bother me. If you can get the border question out, I think a lot of other things are far more manageable than what the skeptics consider them to be.
All right. I want to quickly bring in Ross also on that note of how this is going to be a tricky tightrope walk for India between Japan and China particularly, because given that Prime Minister is in China after that visit he made to Japan. Japan's investing heavily in India, and you're looking at $68 billion worth of investment coming from the country. So at a time when both the countries have in fact committed and shared their outlook for a free and open Indo-Pacific, where does this leave India and Japan's own commitment towards the Indo-Pacific? Because Japan's equally vocal about the tensions in South China Sea. India can't just pull back or pull away because the United States is not committed to it.
It's an interesting issue because on the one hand, similar to India, Japan is concerned about China's military investment and China's military movements in the East China Sea, the South China Sea. China and Japan have a sovereignty dispute over islands known as the Diaoyu in Chinese and the Senkakus in Japanese. But at the same time, Prime Minister Ishiba has also sent some signals that he wants to reduce tensions with China. China still is an important location for Japanese companies to do business, so he's under some pressure from the business sector in that regard as well. So, they have to balance. And then, of course, they have to balance not just their bilateral relationship or their relationship with China, but then they have to balance their relationship with the United States. And for both countries, for both India as well as Japan, their most important security partner is going to remain the United States. So notwithstanding the current tensions between the U.S. and India, there are tensions in the relationship right now. That's certainly a fact, and that's been much discussed in recent weeks, especially after the Trump administration imposed the additional 25% tariff on India. I'm going to remain an optimist on that, though. I think the relationship that Prime Minister Modi and President Trump had developed so well during the first Trump administration that I'm optimistic that the two countries could patch up their differences and move forward based on a large number of shared interests. But if I could quickly address the Quad issue, the fact is, going back to President Obama and then President Trump and President Biden and now President Trump again, the United States president has skipped a number of meetings in Asia, whether that's a Quad meeting or a East Asia Summit meeting or the APEC Summit. And it's angered a lot of people in Asia when the United States president has done that. It's considered disrespectful and sending the wrong signal. And I agree. The United States president should try to attend these meetings. Unfortunately, one thing we know about President Trump is he's not a fan of overseas travel. He doesn't really like to do it. And he's going to be visiting South Korea and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia at the end of October for summit meetings. So getting him to travel very far again in the remaining months of the year, it's difficult.
Right, and perhaps he may just make that visit to China as well. We'll have to see how that shapes up, because even the US is in a very tricky situation at the moment. But going to request you, Ross and Sushant, to continue staying with us, because remember, the big chatter right now is the getting together of the Troika. And the Troika that we are talking about is India, China, Russia at the SCO. So should Donald Trump be worried if he is at all by this trinity? Why so? Because together, all three of these nations, remember, are contributing in terms of the GDP. It amounts to $53.9 trillion. You're also looking at India, China, Russia together exporting worth amount of $5.9 trillion, almost 1/5 of the global merchandise exports flowing through continents, with 4.7 trillion in foreign reserves alone. This troika makes up for 38% of the world's safety net. You're also looking at 3.1 billion citizens, representing 37.8% of the total world population. They form the largest, hungriest consumer market in human history. Add this access to the mix of the SCO and it becomes a formidable grouping. Let me quickly take that forward with Sushant as well. Sushant, there's a lot of talk about the Troika coming together. But remember, if this does work out, it's going to be a revival. There's nothing new about it. This Troika dates back to the post-Cold War era. The question I've been asking everyone is that if it didn't work out then, what is the guarantee that this time around it will work?
No guarantee whatsoever. And Akansha, frankly, a lot of the statistics that you have dropped, on the face of it, those statistics look rather impressive. But when you start breaking it down, I think there are a lot of questions that will arise. Look, in and of itself, if the Chinese, Indian, the Russian, add some of the BRICS countries, this became a new kind of grouping, economic cooperation organization, things could work. But look, you need an anchor. The current anchor, if it is going to be China as the largest and most powerful economy, does it play the same role that the United States played in the global economy 100 years back? It doesn't. Clearly, it doesn't, right? Because the Chinese are still an exporting economy. They're not so much a consuming economy. Their currency does not double up as a kind of a reserve currency, a store of value. Until and unless the Chinese were to move in that direction, I don't see how you just, wake up one day and say that the Americans don't matter or the West doesn't matter. It matters, which is why, because it matters, there is so much of disruption. If the West did not matter, Akansha, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? We're having this conversation because Donald Trump is trying to burn the house down. And because he's trying to burn the house down, we are all trying to find some refuge somewhere on what kind of a new house or what kind of a new setting, a new club we can all try and forge so that, we don't have to get singed by what the arsonists in DC are trying to do. So I think that is the grave challenge which is facing us. Now, if you remove the West and you remove the United States and Europe, can you replicate the global economic system with the current lot of countries?
Right.
But so maybe on the economic domain, there is that Western aspect. But in the security domain, I think there is something to be said for, these countries, regional countries. And for us in India, SCO becomes important because it's a regional grouping. Security underpins this grouping. Now, security is an extremely critical issue for us because we have threats to our security from members of this very same grouping. And if we can try and minimize those threats and those challenges, then we are the better off for it. So I think you need to look at it in that context rather than, a completely separate grouping emerging, which will challenge the current global order. Nobody knows what is going to be the global order because there's only global disorder.
Sorry to interrupt you there. In fact, getting in breaking input, there's a big statement coming in from the